We're not recording.
Now we're recording.
Now we're recording. Oh my God. It took me we're doing something slightly different. We're trying to be classy. We got 3 cameras. I don't know why. Because I like to stun on these hoes. I've already cursed in the first minute of the podcast, and we've been demonetized. I'm going to bleep that out. This is going to be the first bleep we ever have.
Wait. You were getting money for your podcast?
No, not at all.
All right, yeah. Well,
I'm trying to run like a professional, though.
Being prevented from being monetized, not demonetized. It's just
no. I have 50 followers now. I would like to say, okay, this is the John Reynolds Walk the Crowd podcast, aka Podcasting for Standups, the podcast about podcasts. And I got too fancy today. I thought it was going to take me 20 minutes to set up 3 cameras.
I can't point to the third one, but yeah.
Yeah, the third one's just for me because you're not good enough.
Well, you can't. Well, hold on.
No. Yeah, get in there.
Yeah.
Get in there.
Yeah.
And we have Bryan Wooldridge. Introduce yourself to the people.
I think that works. I'm Bryan Wooldridge.
Tell them about the podcast that you run.
Well, all right. So I don't run it. I mean, it's very much so a collective effort, but it's WRYAT. New Orleans public radio now. It's changed kind of the sub-tagline a few times over the seasons.
So we've actually had one other member of your podcast on this podcast already. We had Drew Hugh.
Yeah, Drew.
A guy you work with.
Yeah, love Drew.
You love the Drew?
Yeah. He's great for podcasts. He does funny voices. I'm not saying he has a funny voice, but I'm just saying if you have a funny voice or can do funny voices, it works out in podcasting, especially, sketch characters and improv-based podcasts.
How'd you guys come up with this podcast? What was the genesis of the WRYAT podcast?
So I don't know how much Drew
it doesn't matter. Nobody watched an episode.
I don't know if I'm going to be questioned or fact-check agast Drew's podcast.
No, I'm trying to cause dissension.
Well, I think we've, by this point, gotten our stories mostly aligned. But so I want to say it was early 2019, maybe 2018, but I'm pretty sure it was 2019. One of our buddies, Daryl, fellow comedian Daryl Rollo, he basically just had an idea for a podcast, and he was like, let's do a local NPR satire.
Nice.
And you hear that, and up front, that's a great idea.
It's absolutely a great idea.
Let's do a New Orleans NPR. And we're like, well, WWOZ and that already kind of, those things already kind of exist. So we'll do the comedy version of that. And so a couple of us, 3 of us actually loaded into a car, Will Monson, Mike Macker, and myself. We loaded into a car, and we drove up to Daryl's house on the North Shore. And on the way, we came up with a few just make fun of NPR ideas. How familiar are you with NPR?
I'm about as familiar as everyone else who's voted for Barack Obama twice is with NPR.
Okay, so very, very. So basically, just we took shows that already existed, and we're like, what would be a local fun spin on that? The immediate one that really jumped out to me was Car Talk. Was one of my favorite shows growing up. The Click and Clack brothers answering questions about your car and ragging on how dumb you are about car stuff. And so we were like, well, what would be the New Orleans equivalent to that? And immediately it's Boat Talk. And so the 2 of us who did a fun kind of Cajun-y, Chalmette accent, Will and Mike, they took on the brothers, the D'Amico brothers, and they embodied the Click and Clack brothers, and they do boat talk. But the point of their podcast is you ask boat questions, and they just dance around it the entire episode.
Wait, I gotta ask. So the actual guys who were on Car Talk, their last name is?
I cannot remember.
What's the last name of the guys in your podcast?
Ronnie and Donnie D'Amico.
D'Amico.
Yeah.
So is that sounds slightly?
We just went with a local sounding name.
It sounds local-ish, but it's not French enough for me. Is that French enough?
It's a satire podcast.
We do have a large Italian / Cajun population.
It works.
There's
for
overlap.
Chalmette's a weird place.
There are a lot of Irish Cajuns in Chalmette,
and that's where our characters kind of come out of. They're the Chalmette Click and Clack brothers who do but don't answer your boat related questions.
So how do you guys? What's your guys' writing process for coming up with new sketches or developing existing sketches? So
back to us coming up with the original idea, we came up with I think a few ideas that day. Boat Talk was one of the ones that stuck. Y'all Things Considered was our news segment. Yeah. we had
Wait, what was the name of it again?
Y'all Things Considered.
That's absurd.
That was our
absurd.
news segment. So we just it really came out of like NPR satire. So let's see. Wait, Don't Tell Me became Wait, Don't Stab Me, a New Orleans-based game show where you try to avoid getting stabbed. So, I mean, it was just kind of a New Orleans twist on a lot of NPR stuff. So that's kind of where a lot of the creativity comes from. We're kind of satirizing things that are already out there as public radio or public access. So
okay, and so like some of these are refillable bits. So like some of these bits are going to be on let's like, okay, we did this on episode 3. We're gonna do it again.
Yeah. Reoccurring characters, big deal. It's definitely a creative energy saver to be like, let's check in on this character and see what he's doing.
Well, I think for not even just a fictional mockumentary type podcast, but even for a podcast like this, in theory, this podcast has refillable bits, things we talk about every time.
Yeah.
And I think that is an easy way to help produce your podcast is actually going, here's something we're going to do almost every episode.
Yeah.
Here's something we're going to do every episode.
Yeah. And so we, I think obviously a radio standard is like your bumpers and your call signs and your call tags, like you're listening to so-and-so radio. And here's like a famous person saying good things about us. And like, we have that kind of like throughout every episode. Most episodes have a boat talk. Loop Guru, Drew, you've talked to him. That's his character. He's kind of like our in-house radio DJ, like music DJ, who actually covers the music of WRYAT world for whatever that's worth. So yeah, we have like reoccurring characters. Fleur de Lily is our local fashionista, and she has a fashion show, the Fleur de Lily Fashion Files. So like these characters are definitely reoccurring, and we like to go back to them and develop their world. It's very much in line with like a Mad TV or SNL, where we bring characters back.
Well, I want to get into the nuts and bolts of the writing process, because I know a lot of you guys have an improv background.
Yeah.
I don't have an improv background at all. How do you guys, so like you go, okay, we want to do a new fashionista bit, or we want to do another, what was it, y'all?
The news headline show, Y'all Things Considered.
Y'all want to do a new Y'all Things Considered?
Yeah.
Like, how do you guys write that as like an all hands on deck thing, or does one person take over writing the sketch and everyone else fills it in, or what?
A little of all of the above. We definitely we'll group up, and like some of us will take on one sketch, like Mike and Will do the boat talk. That's because it's mostly improv anyway. But we'll all pitch in with like questions and help flesh out that world and give story ideas. But at the end of the day, it's them kind of driving the character. So I think it's we definitely have assigned ourselves characters to take care of.
Yeah.
And with that, we can kind of work multiple different shows. Like Loop, Drew's always going to be able to do Loop, and he can take Loop anywhere and do different Loop segments. So a lot of creativity comes out of just character-driven work.
Yeah.
Y'all Things Considered, the headlines show, like obviously we'll just have a collective Google shared file and pitch ideas into that.
Wow.
Maybe one week someone will have a better, more fleshed out idea for like a special news coverage segment, and they'll do like a long form. And I don't want to say a lot of it's like we're just kind of like filling in the blank, but we all kind of like say, I'll do this segment in this episode, and I know I can do it with this character that I already have in stock. But as far as like the nitty gritty writing, we're pretty individualistic. We'll write our own sketches for our own characters and then kind of bring them together and like punch them up and like workshop them, or like finish. Someone will like write an outline, and then someone might do the text or the verbatim word. So like it's a hodgepodge of like all the creative processes. So it's a very unique system. Again, we don't really have like who produces it. Like I would say I record it, but like someone else edits it, and like we all do voice acting, we all write, we all take leads on booking people, voice actors as needed. So like we're all kind of putting a hand in on the production stuff too. So I mean it's definitely a collective hodgepodge.
So, and you say it's a hodgepodge, but it sounds like you guys have, at least for a locally run produced show, it seems like you guys have a fairly robust writing system.
It's very flexible. Thankfully, we all trust each other a lot, and I think that's probably lended to our improv-y kind of background, our collective improv. So we know how to trust each other as like, okay, I know you're going to take care of this character. So I've I've talked with, people in the podcast, and I've said, like, any one of us could do a full episode, like, writing for other characters.
Yeah.
So we're all, like, we all know each other. We're all aware of this universe. We all keep up with the universe. Like, we all know what, characters are kind of up to what and what they've been through their past. Like, Loop Guru, Drew's character has been a were-coyote. He's, like, fought demons. They've all fought demons, literally and figuratively. So, we're just kind of building these worlds for these characters and that we all know and understand.
What's like the technical process of actually recording an episode? Because like me, I do mine like this because I'm lazy. I don't want to edit anything. I just want to do it all one shot. Let's go. Obviously, you guys can't do it live one shot.
Yeah, so sometimes we can get it all in one shot, but because there's a lot of Foley work, obviously there's editing involved.
Foley work. Could you explain that to the people? Foley work. So like sound effects and stuff. He's using all these Hollywood terms. We're not Hollywood yet.
The sound effects, the a-natural sound effects you hear in sketch or produced works of art.
So like if Loop Guru is turning into a werewolf, which is funny because is Loop Guru, doesn't that mean werewolf?
Yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, that's his character, but like he is a but he's not a werewolf. He's a were-coyote. He's not that tier of dog. He's like the backyard of New Orleans. So
like kind of between a were-fox and a werewolf, he's a were-coyote.
Yeah, you'd find him in New Orleans.
All right.
That would be the were creature you found in New Orleans. And obviously the Rougarou, but yeah.
And so like you guys are recording it, like what sort of equipment and editing stuff does that involve?
So we use a very similar setup to yours now, actually. I've been doing podcasts for a long time, kind of on and off.
Yeah.
So I remember working with like big boards that was all that was available, and long mics, and it was just a big fucking mess. But like over the years we've kind of brought it down. During the COVID years we did it all via Zoom. Zoom made it very easy to just hit record and all of us be on the same sound level, and if not, our editor could tweak it a little bit as needed. But now we just kind of show up at my house, hang out in the living room, and set up the Zoom P4 and plug in a couple mics very similar to this setup and pass the mic around and read sketches off my TV.
It's so amazing that we have access to equipment like that where we can do some like this.
It's a game changer.
P4. I know we stepped away from it for a little while, but this is what we're on now.
Yeah.
Other things they might get slightly better audio quality, but it's not worth it. This is so simple and brain dead to use. This is what we use now.
Yeah, this was a game changer. We used the old Zoom, the 2-channel one at the bottom that had the cross-faded mic, so you could like.
I have a Tascam similar.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it.
H2N or something.
We used to use that, and that was kind of just problematic with only 2 mics. It didn't really lend itself to.
It's also for audio only productions. It doesn't work as well with these microphones. It doesn't work well with dynamic microphones.
I haven't gone back and checked, but like I can tell I enjoy the sound off. This is way easier to work with. And for Foley work, if we need to like make a sound effect, we can, but more often than not, we'll just Google search free sound effects.
And so what audio editor are you guys using once you get all your sounds and using Audacity?
That's a question for our audio editor. I record straight onto here. It puts it into the WAV format and I'll upload it. But for my personal podcast, I use Audacity. Nice. So I think that's just the easiest thing for most people. And I'll say that I don't do a lot of Foley heavier sound heavy work usually, so I would have to ask someone else.
That's cool.
What they use.
So that's like the beauty of this podcast. Eventually, I'll have had everyone from their podcast on this podcast, and ideally, I will have stolen all of their listeners.
Collectively,
that's really the goal.
A megazord of all our knowledge.
Yes, that's literally So here's the thing. When I started this podcast, I didn't know what my podcast should be about, but I did know that I needed to start. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to interview people who have podcasts. And the one of the refillable bits that's never actually happened was at the end of the show, I would ask people, what should my podcast be about? and they'd give me a suggestion, and then I would actually record a 5-minute podcast on that topic.
Yeah.
It's never happened. It happened one time.
That's a fun idea.
Well, we're going to bring it back. We're going to start it back starting today. At the end of, if I remember to bring it up before we end.
Shit.
And then one day I'll just go back and do all the suggestions. And it's never, I don't know if I'm ever.
Well, good luck with that future project I may or may not be loosely attached to.
What is, you have another podcast. I did one of your podcasts. What's the name of this podcast?
So out of WRYT, I developed a segment called No Sports.
Yeah.
And it was basically just my like localized anti-sports show, like where again we just dance around the actual topic and not really get to it. But it ended up being more of like a weekend update, again back to the SNL or NPR satirizing their already pre-made sketches. And it ended up just being like a weekend update for local sports. And so I did that and I enjoyed it and I love sports. And at a certain point when the production ability got to where I could do it myself, I was like, I like WRYT, but I'm going to take this venture solo. So I might be the first WRYT performer member to like take their product solo.
So a spinoff.
Yeah, a spinoff.
So you're like the Simpsons was to Tracy Ullman show. That's what your No Sports podcast is.
Yeah. And it's really, again, I do a bunch of little different shows under it, one of which I talk to my friends about their love of sports and why they care about sports. And that's kind of my more genuine sit-down talk podcast that I take more seriously. And then I also used to do, I don't know if I'm going to do it this year. I probably will, but I haven't even started thinking about it. And it's getting kind of late, a fantasy football podcast.
Why is it too late?
Because there's only a few more weeks left before the season starts, and I haven't even started thinking about it yet. So I'll jump on it. But the other one is No Sports Headlines, which is the weekend update.
All right.
So, I can pick them up and do them as I please. I'm not committed to anyone. Like, I'm not going to do week to week. I'm just going to, like, whenever I have the time, book it and do it and enjoy it. And right now, I've just been a little busy this summer, and I have not had time to think about the fantasy football one.
Well, I like that, especially with you. And the most recent person we've had on the podcast was Bryan Broussard. Mm-hmm. Byron's a prolific podcaster, but he's also a podcaster who's not like, I have to upload every week.
No, and that's that's such a disadvantage in the podcast world. Like, consistency is really the key. Unless you're just totally banking on like a solid quality product. And like, I'm proud of the product that I'm putting. I'm not fully ashamed of it, but at the same time, I don't expect this to be like a moneymaker. I'm really doing it because I enjoy it. I would hope Byron's doing it. Byron, I hope he's not like, I'm going to put this podcast out maybe once a month and it's going to make me rich.
Byron, watch the episode. Byron does not care if any. Byron actively does not want people to listen.
I watched and that's what I picked up.
He does not want people to listen to this podcast.
He seemed very cool with like, you listen or don't, and that's kind of the attitude I'm approaching with it. And we talked a little bit about it before the show. The podcast market is just super saturated.
Yeah,
and it's hard to consider making this a living unless you like really go all the fucking way in. And with that, you would probably be doing daily content, definitely weekly content, if not daily content.
You'd have to start like a freaking YouTube for it. You'd have to start a Instagram for it. You'd have to start a MailChimp for it. All these things.
And pay attention to all of it. Not just start it, because I think I've started plenty of accounts that I don't check it, like the No Sports. Some of the social media accounts I don't check the X anymore for No Sports. But I think that's a key to like building up, and that's one thing where I think WRYT takes a little bit more of a divergence, because I still do WRYT. We're fixing to drop season 7 coming up. We're working on it. We've been a little bit easier on ourselves, but previous seasons we were very committed. Like, this is episode 1's release date, and we're gonna do an episode every week. We might take a mid-season break, and we're gonna come back and do every week for 13 episodes.
Yeah. And
so it was kind of like back to school. Here's your deadline. You have a project. Bring these characters to life within that time frame. And then No Sports is the exact opposite. It's kind of like, I feel like talking to John today about sports.
With WRYT, do you guys ever, I guess this is, maybe you guys don't do this, you guys ever do like compilations where it's like the best of Loop Guru?
Yeah.
The best of Fashion Week.
So I'm a little bit of a record-keeping nerd. So I went way overboard, and I've like cataloged like every sketch segment that we've done in WRYT's 6.5 seasons. And I've like put character names to it and like what was happening in them.
You guys have like an index. You guys have.
I have a very detailed index.
Wait. So this is like Breaking Bad, where if you guys get a new writer in, you just give the new writer the Bible, and it's like, oh, here's the continuity we need you to keep.
If they're willing to sort through it, look through all my broken notes in an Excel spreadsheet, yeah, you could absolutely get completely caught up with the WRYT world.
I am sure that this podcast, I'm going to make a promise to you people right now. This podcast is never going to have an Excel spreadsheet. That's never going to happen. And if it does happen, that means that we hit the big time and somebody else is running it. It will never be me. I don't even like using Excel for work. I'm behind on so many. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Well, Excel was just a easy way to keep track of everything. But yeah, no, I've like every podcast is time stamped. I know where all the sketches are in each episode. On our YouTube, you can go and click each like segment and like get to it individually. We haven't published the universe in its full for any reason. There's not really been a demand other than me just like, I think this would be easier. But no, that with that, having that has helped us keep up with all the characters. So like you can look back and like type in look for Loop Guru and like boom, 57,000 instances of Loop Guru, and you can go through and look what he did.
Wait, and so like you guys do the one thing where you do it the traditional podcast route, where you upload it to a podcast host, and then people can find it on iTunes or Spotify, Amazon, whatever,
wherever you get your podcast.
But then you guys also upload it to YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When did you guys start doing that? Was that from the beginning, or something you guys figured out?
I don't know when exactly we started. It wasn't immediately by any means, but it was just another outlet to put our stuff out there. And I was just kind of looking at it just frustratedly. I was like, well, there's the description field that like I can actually do the timestamp links that you can do in YouTube. You can't really. Can you do timestamp links in Spotify?
I don't know.
Well, either way, I would have to do that for each episode across each different platform, like iTunes, Spotify, all the different platforms. Whereas YouTube, I can just go in and be like, these are these sketches in this episode, and here's a timestamp link for them.
I wonder if you can make a playlist where it doesn't play the whole video, but just specific timestamps. Because that would be one way you can make a highlight reel.
That would be level 2. Back to your original question. Yes, at the end of the seasons, we do a best of, and we all collectively say, hey, we enjoyed this sketch, and we'll make a best of episode. So we've done that for the past 3 or 4 seasons, I want to say. But yeah, that was kind of the goal of level 2 of this whole universe, was be able to be like, oh, you can just type in Loop Guru and all his sketches will come up, link to YouTube, boom, right there. And so that was the goal. And I guess theoretically, if I put in a few more hours of work, I could do that. But again, there hasn't really been a demand for it. So
yeah, I guess that's always the thing. It's normally,
I went through and time-stamped everything, which was fucking tedious enough.
I don't even do that with this one. I time-stamped one episode, and that was one of the episodes that did the best. Mm-hmm. And so like I know for a fact that I should time-stamp all of them, and I still don't. I
don't even know if it like statistically helped, because we don't even look at YouTube numbers. Like this was again just for my like OCD like record keeping brain. But like yeah, we mostly look at our host site that Libsyn that gives us an aggregate of all the numbers and shit. So
so do you said Libsyn is where you host WRYT?
Yeah.
Is that also where you host No Sports?
No. From dealing with Libsyn, what little I had to with WRYT, again, someone else kind of really handled that interface. Yeah. I just was like Googled easiest podcast hosting service, and like Anchor was it's a part of Spotify, and I guess like part of their terms and agreements were like, hey, it's free, but if you become something, it's ours.
What do you mean it's ours?
I don't know the term. I didn't read the service terms and agreement, but basically they said they would host my shit for free. And like once it started getting numbers that could make money, they'll talk. They'll like, hey, we can put ads in there.
So, hey, buddy, it's a nice podcast. Be ashamed if something happened to it.
Yeah. And well, I have everything backed up, so I can upload to a new host if need be. But like, yeah, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting. This is like the Spotify mafia podcast. But yeah, Anchor is hella easy. If you're just getting into podcast and looking for like a simple host, like it is drag and drop the audio file, type in the information, boom, everywhere.
Yeah, I'm thinking that you talked me into it after your podcast that I need to actually have this thing living somewhere besides just YouTube.
Yeah, podcast on YouTube.
Okay,
it works.
Somebody who was on this podcast, I'm not going to tell you
our
which
podcast
episode,
is YouTube.
Somebody told me that my podcast is not a real podcast because I don't have an RSS feed. However, somebody told me that YouTube, they're at the point now where if your podcast starts doing numbers, they put up an RSS feed for you so it plays on YouTube Music.
Everything's just starting to do it.
So I'm going to backdoor my way into having a real podcast. And I'm going to say booyah to this person whose name may or may not rhyme with boo-hoo. It wasn't Drew, it wasn't our friend Drew. It was another person who was on this podcast whose name rhymed with boo-hoo, who was talking that mess. And I'm going to get my RSS feed. It's going to happen. I'm sorry, I got a little bit serious.
No. I mean, I don't want to, get implicated in any altercations you're looking to start. But like, I think you should have an RSS feed too. That is literally it's the Bitcoin of like podcast feed.
So we got two people here who
it's just so easy these days.
Rhymes
it's
with
just so easy these days.
And the other guy's name rhymes with crying.
Yep.
And they're both boohooing and crying that I should get an RSS feed. Meanwhile, YouTube is serving us up looks. I don't advertise this podcast at all. I know people who post about their podcast all day on their Facebook and Twitters, and I still get more views than them. What's up?
That's fucking gold. Yeah, no, again, if you have a good product, people are going to listen to it. The other alternative is bust your ass, right? We can do both and bank.
We're going full time, not with the podcast, but I'm going full time comedy in the next year. Hopefully my boss does not watch this because it'll be news to her. But by this time next year, I don't care if it's making $5 a month from a podcast and $20 a week hosting. We're gonna put it together. We're gonna scrape up a nice $50,000 a year next year doing comedy related stuff. We're gonna decree and declare this. It's in the capabilities. I'm back.
Make a living wage off comedy.
And comedy related
2023, 24.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm okay.
I'm cheering for you.
He's like, I'm wild skeptical.
Yeah, I believe if anyone can do it, you can do it. Look at this fucking setup that you just pack away in like a briefcase.
The backyard. It's really hot out here.
Yeah, this is
mistakes have been made.
Well, no, I wanted to say this way earlier, but this is the hottest podcast on earth. I checked the temperature. It was 98, feels like 110. We are outside recording. I challenge any other podcast on earth that is not like in the desert to be recording in these conditions.
Nobody has this level of commitment to the fans, and these lights are not helping things. Hopefully you guys can see us crystal clear, but nobody else is willing to do this for you people. I think the last time I did a call out on how many subscribers we had, it was 38. We have 12 new people, and you guys are making this possible, and that's why we're getting all these extra cameras and extra lights, and we're doing podcasts with heat strokes right now. He wanted me to drink a beer, and I said, no, I have to be fresh and resolved for my fans.
So you didn't drink that beer?
I drank half of it.
All right,
I drank half of it.
We're sweating, and we got to get liquids back in. So like the beer is liquid, so that's good enough.
That's not really how that works.
There's water and beer.
Oh, we got plenty of time. We got a few minutes.
Well, so cool.
If you could give a new person a podcasting advice, level one, they're just starting. My buddy Elliot Hamilton, I can't wait to have him on the podcast. He just started his. He sent me a rough draft of the first one, and I go, this is very rough, and we're going to figure it out. But what would you give a person brand new who's thinking about starting a podcast? What advice would you give them?
Well, hopefully you're already you're asking, like, how do I do a podcast? Hopefully you're coming at me with already an idea. Step one, come up with an idea for your podcast. I think the second biggest step would just be familiarize yourself with the equipment. You don't have to be an expert at it, but be able to plug things in, know where they plug in, press a button, and know how to get it to your computer or to someone who can edit it. ideally you just want to be the on-air talent for whatever podcast or producer. You don't want to be like doing it all. But the equipment is like ground one. Learn how to do that. Keep other people from like taking advantage of you and being like, oh yeah, it costs, $300 an hour of studio time for me to press the buttons. Like there's no, you've proven it with this exactly. Like spend that $300 on like the equipment and you can take that with you anywhere.
Yeah.
All because you familiarized yourself. I mean, I don't know if you'd consider yourself an expert at the Zoom P4.
I am.
Okay, you've been hitting the sound pads?
No, we don't use sound. Well, we
the sound pads.
Don't press that sound pad.
Have you not done?
No, I was just saying because we at one point we had a theme song, but we lost the rights to the theme song. I lost the theme song in a breakup, so don't. No,
Which
no
one
name.
is that?
No, don't press that. Don't.
Is
don't
it A?
It's not on there anymore.
Okay.
I've changed it.
Okay.
But
the laugh one and the clap one that it came standard
with. You can
with.
press it if you want to.
All right.
I'm gonna take it.
Have you messed with them at all?
I have no idea. I'm sure.
Goof troop.
See, here's the problem. Here's the problem with improvers. So we've had 3 improvers on this show so far.
Stand-up podcast. Improv.
Well, you guys have all done stand-up so far.
Yeah.
Here's the problem with improvers. They see buttons, they press buttons.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that button.
Nobody in my audience knows what that means. It's a thing that they do where you're not allowed to tell people no. I'm going to tell you something about stand-up. Okay. The key to stand-up is no. No. You're telling a joke and somebody in the audience might straight up go, no. And you have to deal with that. You have to make a decision whether no means no or no means yes in the least creepy way possible. That's what you need to do in stand-up.
There's a lot of negging in stand-up,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Self-negging, negging the crowd.
Absolutely.
It's very negative art form.
$8. They want negativity.
Yeah.
You paid $30. You paid $30. You want positivity. $8. I want somebody whose life is worse than mine.
Where are we? Where do you think we are, America? You pay for hate in this country.
You better believe it, but not a lot.
No, $5. Two.
I want to hear how the people after the show. They always want to talk with you if you have a good set, and there's like. I do like sort of jovial stuff.
Yeah, you're more of an uplifting on-stage persona for sure.
Somebody stopped me at Always the other day as I'm leaving this couple, these 2 ladies, and they were like, I really like how you like shared these like obvious points of pain and you made them jovial. And I was like, thank you. That was it.
I'm glad you enjoyed comedy.
and she was like, could you explain how you came up with that? I was like, no, that literally happened. I'm not that smart. I did not invent any of that. That just literally happened.
If you want to walk a mile in my shoes, if you want to live this life, you can walk get the material
in my Air Jordan sneakers. Okay.
Comfier than mine.
Okay, so that's your advice for beginners.
Get familiarized with the equipment. Step 1, have an idea for your podcast because there's no point in doing all that unless you want to be a producer.
We disagree on this podcast, but we're going to take his advice.
Yeah, get familiar with the equipment. Very important.
We agree with that.
Yeah.
But we start podcasts here just to start them.
Mm-hmm.
You know how they say that there are too many comics with podcasts?
Every comedian has a podcast.
They're not enough.
2 podcasts for every comedian?
Every comedian needs 1 podcast and another podcast is cooking for when that one slows down.
Okay, podcasts. I got 2, so I'm doing my part.
You're doing your part, but don't discourage these people. We need. Here's the thing. This is. I'm gonna tell this to you. I'm gonna tell you this. This is a scam right here. This is a fucking This is an effing pyramid scheme I'm running right here. I want to convince these people to have podcasts so that they have to watch my podcast.
$300 an hour for studio time.
I'm not going to charge people. I don't want these people in my house.
Yeah. You take the ad money. You take the ad revenue.
Yeah, I want the. I want the affiliate stuff. Where eventually I'm an affiliate, and then I can post this PodTrack P4 with a link to it, and then they pay Amazon $150, and I get 75 cents. That's what I want.
I think since it's on YouTube, I think you could already post like a link.
I got to get
to equipment to like your own Amazon front to get like 1%. I think that's.
You think I could do that?
I think that's doable. Because there's people who are like, hey, buy this through my Amazon link, and I get 10%.
Are we allowed to talk about this on YouTube?
I don't know. Are they going to remonetize and demonetize you?
Okay, so if you had an intermediate podcaster, somebody on my level, what advice would you give me?
I think you're kind of already hinting at it. It's kind of start figuring out how to delegate things out to other people, whether it be the shows you're making, the product you're producing, or if you're on the other side of that and you're the one like, you know, creating and producing and talking on camera, then have someone run the equipment. I mean, no offense, but it's kind of a pain in the ass to like set up all the equipment. I just watched you do all that. Level 2 would probably be like get some help on board, get some more people, more hands in the pot, and it can be a hodgepodge thing like WRYT is, or it could be like hire an intern and like, you know, slap him around and never pay him.
I think I'm like, hey, I can't slap him around and not pay him. It's got to be one. Or maybe,
okay, yeah, you can slap him around and pay him a little bit.
Maybe I can find somebody who accepts slaps as payment, but then that'd be weird.
Well, I mean, you know, not to get too deep into the business of it, but like, I mean, there is always like, hey, you know, you're good at this one aspect of it, I'm good at this aspect of it. Let's do a joint venture, and like, you don't have to pay them. You can just offer them like a stock split. Like, hey, I get 60% of the company, you get 40. But like, always stay in control. You always keep control. That's very important.
With
5149,
someone else's podcast, even though it didn't come to fruition, I was coming on as producer for someone else's podcast.
Yeah,
it hasn't come to fruition yet, and that was one of the reasons why I did the upscale on equipment to simplify this person's recording process.
Sure,
we're going to have it all. We're just going to do it. And I believed in the mission of the podcast. I believed in the folks that they interviewed. I was like, that's pretty cool. So I guess I'm a proof of concept that you can find somebody who's just like, oh, I'm just down with your podcast. I just want to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Man.
It's easier than you think to find people who want to do similar things but have a different skill set than you.
Yeah.
So like, be patient to find those people for sure. And, you know, obviously you're going to deal with fallout. You're going to deal with like people who are, I don't want to say bad actors, but like people you're just not going to work with. So like, be patient to sort through those people to get to the ones that are going to like host the funniest show on your podcast network or handle all your equipment with more care than you would, you know. Find those people, definitely latch onto them. But, you know, obviously treat them with respect, you know, give them that, you know, 5% of the company, you know, whatever keeps you in charge, and them, you know, feeling confident.
And so Bryan's hit at it right now with the idea that we maybe we might have another podcast on the same YouTube page. Maybe you might see someone else on here one day, and they're talking about something that's actually substantial, and I'm just coming in going, hey, equipment, technique, yada, yada, yada. And then eventually you won't see me at all because I'm just going to be robbing them blind and underpaying them. That might happen.
But always the goal is to do as little as possible on your own project.
Absolutely.
That's
my goal. And right now I'm doing it all. Okay. Are you a consumer of like big budget, famous podcasts? Are you a consumer?
Yes, I am a consumer of very popular podcasts. I would say I listen to 3 to 4 hours of podcast a day.
A day? I thought you were going to say a week.
No,
or a month,
no.
a day. So like podcasting is your life.
So I work from home. Not that it matters. Even when I worked at an office, I would listen to like radio shows and podcasts just to pass the time. I'm not really. I like music. I'm not a freak, you know. So I enjoy music, but if I'm going to listen to something and work, I would rather it be like idle conversations of things I like. So I listen to like the Dan Le Batard show, the sports podcast, and they do like 4 hours a day just because they have so many people in their group. So I listen to a lot of that, but like I listen to a couple wrestling podcasts because, you know, I am a freak. I am into that. So yeah, I consume a lot of podcasts, and it's also, most of them are very they're real people doing real things, but you listen because these characters, these people are so endearing as they are.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not necessarily listening for like the most recent sports news updates or the most popular wrestling opinions. I'm really just listening to these characters be funny and enjoyable around each other.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the Dan Le Batard. That's his name?
Yeah, Dan Le Batard.
I'm glad you mentioned
Gods.
Dan Le Batard in that. This is something I want to ask you about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, ESPN just recently had a huge round of layoffs and not renewing people's contracts, things like that.
Yep.
And then they're also bringing in a bunch of podcasters, right? But also
because podcasts are cheap.
Yeah, podcasts are cheap. But one of the things that's really standing out to me are some of the TV personalities who saw this coming, who started podcasts like a year ago, a year and a half ago, and their podcasts are doing very well. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because now the topic on all of these podcasts are about their colleagues getting laid off. So it's sort of like the whole pyramid scheme thing again, where it's like they're doing a podcast about this one very niche thing. So it's like, instead of me listening to this guy talk about sports, I'm listening to this guy talk about this other guy who usually talks about sports.
All right, so ESPN definitely adheres to that formula. ESPN thinks they're like the kingmakers. They think they can put anybody in front of the ESPN camera and like, you're the new Stephen A. You're the new that guy. And for a while, they kind of did and could. And just, like things don't stay the same in any industry. You kind of got to adapt with it. And Dan Le Batard, because I think he had a lot of younger people around him helping produce and run the show, he definitely had a better sense of where the industry was going. And he was able to jump ship and kind of do what you did. Like, just fuck all these other people trying to box me in and not pay me what I know I could make on my own. I'll just do it myself. Yeah. And like, I mean, you don't have like, the big sponsorships that they kind of came in. I mean, but if you work with ESPN, you might have those people, because the CEO of his new company is like a former ESPN executive VP. So, he came with a lot of firepower from ESPN, but definitely one of those first people to be like, hey, this ship is sinking, like the industry changing.
Well, he rang the alarm probably before COVID.
He did. Yeah, no, it was. There was, I remember the big, I could talk Dan Le Batard show drama with him all day, but no, he saw that, podcasting is a viable thing on its own. Now, granted, they're branching into like video and like streaming stuff, but like it's grounded in podcasts. He saw that was the future, and maybe the next step will be streaming and doing video stuff. So it's good that you're keeping up with all with the direction it's going. And so it's just kind of biting ESPN in the ass. They had the opportunity to be like, you know what, you're right, because they could have easily overproduced tons of podcasts. And now instead of doing that, they're cutting what they perceive as dead weight now, which is all these like I don't want to say overpaid. I think they're paid fairly for what they do. But all these journalists and reporters are just, get out of here. We'll get the cheap people in, when they could have just been doing cheaply with the power players all along.
Well, and it's so interesting to me, because one of my favorite things, I used to like be obsessed with like the history of different businesses. And one of my favorite things about a business being a market leader and how it becomes not the market leader is almost always they create their own worst enemy. So it's like, you look at like Nintendo. Nintendo ran video games for years. Yeah. Nintendo basically brought Sony into video games. They had a joint project for the first PlayStation was supposed to be a Nintendo, but it was going to be designed by Sony. Yeah. And Nintendo goes, we don't want this. You can have it, Sony. And that's how Sony PlayStation started. ESPN's creating they laid off Bomani Jones. And they're creating all this competition by letting all these people go.
Well, so not to defend ESPN in any way, but like, what is their business model? Make sports podcasts? No, it's do sports shows. So they were never looking at podcasts as a new revenue. Podcast was just something that kind of farted out of a product they were already making.
I don't know what their actual business model is, because I have cable. I have not intentionally watched ESPN in maybe 7 years.
Sports news, I think, is in part of what ESPN. I think the S is sports and is news.
Do they still have?
I think that's what they're grounded in.
What was that show they used to have? They used to have this really good show on Sundays. There's all these like really serious sports journalists wearing ties. They're very. What was it?
Around the Horn?
No. It was It was similar to that,
but
way before that. It was not wacky at all. It was like the sort of sportscasters like your grandparents would watch. And they were very serious. And you're like, this is killing the game.
See, that's when I wasn't watching.
I used to love that show.
Yeah.
And they got rid of it. It's like, all these guys are too old. And it's like, if you're going to do TV, you're going to do traditional media, they're not going to compete with the whiz bang. And they hit lightning in a bottle with pardon the interruption. And they've been riding that wave for 20 years.
And like, and with Dan Le Batard, highly questionable. They had the personalities that will bring people in and keep a crowd. Like, they had that. And again, I think it was just because they were more focused on like, no, sports news is our thing, and we can put anyone to do sports news, and whatever medium comes to be, we'll just put our brand on it and put someone in there.
I think they had Bill Simmons for a while, right?
Yeah.
They were sort of realizing that the personality could be the product. They were hitting on it with that.
And they realize it too. Why else would they be paying like Stephen A. buku money? You know?
Yeah.
They realize it. The personality can make it. I don't know. It's interesting. The bubble popped. That's just really what we saw.
The bubble definitely popped.
The best of the best got kept, and everyone else is now you're now lower class.
You are a regular journalist
back down
with a podcast, and hopefully you saved up money to buy a microphone.
Hopefully you built a following, and you know the equipment well enough to like not get screwed on recording your new thing that you're gonna have to do on your own.
And one thing is, what's his name? Nick Wright. That's a sportscaster, right? I'm gonna let you go after this, but Nick Wright, that's a sportscaster, right? I like his podcast, and I like how it started, where it was just like, oh, they don't know how to use any of this equipment. It's kind of like when late night went to YouTube for a while, and it's like, Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers, and it was just like the worst. It was like there's every YouTuber in the country, like I had better production value than they had. But then eventually they figured it out. I was like, oh, you could do this, you could do this, and then they were like, holy moly, we could really just do this from the house. This is like a thing.
And it's so funny with YouTube. It's almost like the world was able to do video before like podcasts became even a viable like source of like income. Like people were making videos. I guess now TikToks are a viable thing for some people, but yeah, it's just technology has been so fucking amazing and getting like useless opinions out there.
I love it because I'm one of those useless opinions in the ether.
Me too.
Okay, now I got to ask you a question.
All right.
Even though I'm probably never going to do this. What do you think, from what you know about me, what should my podcast be about?
This specific one, or me just asking what you should do a podcast about?
Because this is about me. What should I do? Because you said everybody, you need a podcast to start. This is me trying to figure it out on what's going to be my $1 million podcast idea. What is the perfect vehicle for my personality as far as you see it?
Oh, man.
What do you think I should do?
All right. Hear me out.
Uh-oh.
You're a longtime New Orleans native.
Yes, I am.
You know all of this shit.
Everything on this side of Elysian Fields.
Yes, this bowl that we live in.
Cross Elysian Fields. I don't know anything.
I think like a John Does New Orleans, kind of like not a travel show, because you would just be traveling to your own city and doing not touristy things, but the things you have done as like a longtime resident. I think I don't want to do like French Quarter shit, but like
that's really interesting.
Like a stay-at-home travel show, because staycations are a thing. I think a stay-at-home travel show.
I think we're gonna do this. I think we're gonna actually do all of them eventually. I'm back at it. I'm gonna do the what do you call it? The when you're like in when you're the president does a State of the Union.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a State of the Cast address, even though it's August and it's almost next year. Had a little bit of falling off this year. I'll tell you guys, update you guys on what's been going on with me, where I've been at. But we're back. We're gonna start doing, like 2 or 3 a year, 4 or 5 a year. We're not gonna be no more of this 3 a year stuff. We're not doing that no more. We're back on track. We're quarterly again. I don't know, but I got some other guests lined up. We've had Bryan Wooldridge. Tell them about your 2 podcasts you'd like for them to check out.
So WRYAT, New Orleans Public Radio, available wherever you can download your podcasts and on YouTube. And then also my No Sports podcast. That's NO Sports Pod on like most social media platforms, but I don't really post. But yeah, if you look for No Sports, New Orleans Sports, I should show up in your podcast search.
So that's been me, John Reynolds, Bryan Wooldridge.
That's me.
The Walk the Crowd podcast, the podcast about podcasts, podcasting for stand-ups. We still do not have an actual name for this podcast, and that's why there's no RSS feed, because I can't settle on a name.
TBD.
But this has been really cool. Check you guys out later. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.